Russia suffered another humiliating setback at the hands of Ukrainians on the banks of the Siverskyi Donets River. Over 8 days between the 5th and the 13th of May, Russian forces of the 74th Motorized Rifle Brigade attempted to make several crossings of the Siverskyi Donets River. They encountered severe resistance from Ukrainian tanks and concentrated artillery fire, and at least one battalion tactical group was been completely destroyed. Some observers have described it as one of the deadliest engagements of the war so far. The river, being one of the longest in Ukraine, is considered a key part of Ukraine's defense plan in the east of the country. Russian forces recently renewed their brutal offensive in Ukraine by concentrating their combat power in the east of the country. Many Western observers believe Putin intends to use some territorial gains in the east as a pretext for claiming victory in Ukraine. However, Russian generals displayed a stunning lack of tactical awareness by conducting a hastily arranged and poorly organized crossing of the Siverskyi Donets River using pontoon bridges. The fact that the Russians would attempt an operation such as this in broad daylight and right under the nose of the Ukrainians, shows the tremendous pressure they must be under to make progress and provide Putin with the much sought-after propaganda victory. According to eyewitnesses on the ground, the Russians attempted to cross the river and were met with heavy shellfire from Ukrainian artillery, which trapped a number of Russian units on the Ukrainian side of the river. Reports suggest the Russian forces were attempting to retreat when they were met with withering fire from artillery as they attempted to flee back across the river to safety. It's believed upwards of 500 Russian personnel were killed in the engagement, and dozens more tanks, vehicles, helicopters, boats and other equipment were destroyed. Attempts by the Russians to conceal what they were doing by lighting fires and creating smoke in the surrounding trees did little to prevent Ukrainian artillery spotters from directing devastating fire onto the exposed Russian troops. The scale of the debacle on the Siverskyi Donets River was so great that it prompted many Kremlin commentators to break ranks and openly criticize the Russian command. Many for the first time. Russian commentators who have loyally towed the Kremlin's line, that for them to speak out in this way shows that they have more awareness about the realities faced by Russian forces on the ground than many of them would care to admit to their audiences across television and social media. One such influencer, Yuri Podolyaka, said, "The last straw that overwhelmed my patience was the events around Bilohorivka, where, due to stupidity, I emphasize, because of the stupidity of the Russian command, at least one battalion tactical group was burned, possibly two." He was also critical of the Russian leadership for lacking tactical imagination, repeating the same mistakes over again, and for having inadequate equipment available. Another blogger called Siverskyi went as far as to openly accuse the commanders of sabotage, not incompetence. This disaster, which is not Russia's first in this war, is unlikely to get a significant mention on Russian evening propaganda news. Troop losses and casualty figures are always a highly political and controversial topic in Russia and often remain a closely guarded state secret. So it's unlikely news of this latest military setback will filter down to the Russian people in any meaningful way. It's also difficult to know if there will be any accountability and the Russian command for these losses, as it's been suggested that a culture of blame exists amongst the Russian high command, with no one wanting to take responsibility for the latest failure. This latest Russian setback is yet another victory for Volodymyr Zelensky and further underscores not only Ukraine's willingness, but their ability to resist the Russian occupier. The inability of Russian forces to achieve any sort of a strategic breakthrough in the Donbas region shows that many of the problems that plagued the first phase of their so-called special military operation continue to persist. These problems include inadequate intelligence, poor preparation and incompetence at all levels of command. The Russians had hoped that a more expansive war fought in the open terrain of the Donbass would better suit their heavy focus on armored units. But it's starting to look more likely this war will descend into brutal artillery duels and a return to trench warfare. Although this latest defeat for the Russians is unlikely to prove decisive, it highlights the many problems the Russian army has experienced throughout the course of this campaign. Without substantial changes, The Russian military is unlikely to achieve a major breakthrough in the near future, and this war is more likely to descend into years of brutal attritional fighting. That's all for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.